Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Dev Diary, where today we continue working on our game about preferential difficulty. Now, last time we finally introduced life into our main bad guy of the experience. That's right, the big baddie finally got some moves in the form of several different attacks. They included actions such as shooting, dashing, and summoning various points of destruction. Overall, it was a solid beginning to introducing a new aspect of difficulty to the experience. It's something we will continue focusing on with today's entry. So 5 new attacks have been added, most of which tread down the less conventional path. Starting with the first attack, which I simply named Grid. It's a multi-state attack, with the first state being the tell state. Then in the attack state, several collision lines are then generated in a grid pattern. And of course, should the player touch said grid lines, they will take damage. And as we've done in previous attacks, the grid is drawn during the tell phase. The grid is then changed from black to red during the danger phase. The results are interesting, though I'm not entirely sure we will be keeping it. At least not in this form. Well, not a terrible idea, I'm just not sold on the concept as is. Anyway, that was just the first attack done for the session, so let's move on to the second. Next up is a laser attack, which works very similarly to the grid attack, with the first state being the tell state. This state determines the direction of the laser beam, and during the attack phase, an actual laser beam object is created. Now, this object isn't anything special, we're mostly using it for collision purposes. Now, this laser beam object is spawned in the determined direction. It's then possible that said laser will slowly begin to rotate towards the player. After some time, the laser is destroyed and the attack is reset. The draw code for this one simply creates a line at the determined angle, resulting in a nice and hefty laser beam attack that's actually quite intimidating. Again, the reason for the object here instead of a collision line was simply due to the fact that I wanted the collision to be thicker than just a line. Anyway, that's attack 2, so let's move on to the next attack, the drop attack. Now, this one was arguably the most complicated attack to code this session. In the first of multiple steps, a position variable records the boss's Y position and then hides the boss object itself. That position variable, as well as what would be the variable used for a shadow, would be modified at particular rates. In the next state, the enemy's position is updated to begin moving towards the player, and after some time, the state is updated. The penultimate state then begins a sequence. The position variable is updated, and a collision circle is created a few frames later. And as you'd expect, this collision circle can damage the player. The position and shadow variables are again modified at certain rates, eventually leading to the enemy being visible again and the final state. The final state is simply a rest period, allowing the boss to be vulnerable to attack before the reset. And the draws for this attack are pretty simple. A duplicate of the boss is drawn during the first and penultimate phases, and a shadow is drawn at the enemy's position throughout the entire attack. Now, the reason that this attack was so complicated was due to the hacky nature of the code. As you may have noticed, the arena has shrunk and the camera pulled all the way out. This means that both the enemy and player are visible at all times. So the need to have our boss enemy quote-unquote jump complicated the restrictions to prevent said boss enemy from leaving the arena space, meaning extra code had to be added to create a fake enemy to do the actual jump effect. And honestly, as I'm looking back at this while describing it, I'm realizing how much easier this would have been if the drop was like a dig move instead. So we'll just have to keep that in mind for later. For now, let's move on to the next attack. The next attack is simply one where the boss chases the player around. Pretty standard stuff, with the enemy easing into turns to move towards the player, rather than instantly pivoting. Now, where things get a little unconventional is in the next part. In order to keep the player on their toes, a random spike, for now at least, is spawned on the player's current position. Another dangerous object was then created to pull this off, which is specifically dedicated to damaging the player. It can also be activated and deactivated, allowing for the attack sequence to use said danger object as both the warning and source of danger. What also makes this attack unique is that the boss will continue to chase the player until it has gone through and created a set amount of spikes, which is determined when the attack is generated. And this results in the first attack added that technically does not run on a strict timer. Now, I could have used collision rectangles and draws for this attack, but it seemed best to use an object for depth purposes, which is honestly a major concern that appeared when working on the previous attack. But that is our unconventional chase attack, so let's move on to the final attack for the session. It's called a vine attack, due to a lack of better description for the time being. This attack requires a function to add entries to a list of vines. These vines are then generated based on the determined amount over time. The creation of said vines uses the same danger object used in the previous attack. That object's ID is stored in the vine list along with some other data in array form. That data is then used to slowly spawn in multiple danger zones/spikes within the arena. The extra values stored in the array refer to lifespan of said danger and the current state of said danger. Again, similar to the previous attack, the first state is a tell, the second is the damage, and the third is the cleanup. And once all vines have had their turn to attack, a reset occurs, making this the second attack that technically does not rely on an overall timer. And the results are kinda weird, but they're meant to be like the boss summoning something to attack the player from the ground, like a vine or some rocks. It's hard to explain, and to be honest, feels very similar to other existing attacks. Now, I have some ideas to make it more unique, but I decided to leave it as is for now. And that does it for the new additions this session. 5 new attacks, all with their own slightly weird twists. I should also note that this is being recorded like a few days after the previous session, so hopefully by next episode I'll be able to implement any ideas that y'all may have made. But either way, we're starting to really fill out some of the more interesting areas of the game, and the attacks definitely need to be sped up and make them actually dangerous. But overall, this has been, I feel, a very solid move in the right direction. I'm hopeful at some point there will be more synergy between boss and the player's undeath mechanics, but for now I'm just happy to see that nothing is broken. So with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary. If you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already, and let me know what you think of the new attacks and or what other types of attacks should be added next. Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.